The evening sun was starting to dip, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple over the quiet suburban streets. It was that peaceful hour between the rush of the day and the stillness of night. In his sensible sedan, a man was driving home. He was tired, but it was a good tired. The kind that comes from a long day of work that feels meaningful. His name was Samuel Vance. But to most people in his world, he was Director Vance. For the last 7 years, he had been the director of the State Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board. It was a mouthful of a title. What it meant, in simple terms, was that he was in charge of the rules. He helped decide how police officers across the entire state were trained, what they learned about ethics, about de-escalation, about dealing with people fairly. He wrote the policies that were supposed to prevent bad things from happening. Before that, he'd spent 25 years wearing a uniform himself, working his way up from a patrol officer in a tough city to a command position. He knew the job from the asphalt up. Tonight, he was just a guy going home to his wife. He was thinking about dinner, maybe about the baseball game he had recorded. His suit jacket was folded on the passenger seat, his tie loosened. He signaled, checked his blind spot a habit drilled into him for decades, and changed lanes. Half a mile back, in a marked patrol car, another man was watching the traffic flow. Officer Mark Rourke had been on the force for 11 years. His record was complicated. He had a stack of commendations for arrests, for being proactive, for what his supporters called cleaning up the streets. He also had a thicker-than-average file of complaints. People said he had a short fuse, that he was quick to assume the worst, that he treated certain neighborhoods and certain types of people differently. Internal Affairs had looked into him 3 times. Each time he was cleared, often because it was just his word against someone else's. It built in him a kind of stubborn certainty. He believed he knew a criminal when he saw one, and he believed the system was too soft. The paperwork from the complaints just proved to him that the bosses downtown didn't understand the real work on the street. Director Vance's lane change was smooth and legal. But Officer Rourke was looking for anything. He saw the sedan, a common model, a few years old. He saw the driver, and in that glance, a story wrote itself in Rourke's mind. It was a story based on a feeling, a gut instinct that had been reinforced by years of his own narrow experiences. He didn't see a tired professional going home. He saw a profile that, to him, signaled potential trouble. Maybe the car was just a little too nice for the neighborhood it was driving through in his mind. Maybe it was just a feeling. The blue lights flickered on behind Vance's car. Vance saw them in his mirror. A mild annoyance flickered through him. He hadn't been speeding. He knew he'd signaled. He ran through a mental checklist. Taillight out? Registration sticker? He couldn't think of anything. With a calm sigh, he pulled his car perfectly to the right-hand curb, stopping in a well-lit area near a shopping plaza parking lot. He put the transmission in park and rolled down his window. His movements were slow and obvious. He knew the drill. From both sides of it, he watched in the side mirror as the officer got out. He could tell from the posture, the straight back, the deliberate walk, that this officer was in a certain mode. It was a tense, authoritative stride, Vance recognized. He'd seen it in young cops, the ones trying to project control. He made sure his hands were on the top of the steering wheel, in plain sight. Officer Rourke approached the driver's side. His flashlight, though it was still twilight, was already on, pointed briefly into the back seat before settling on Vance's face. "License and registration," Rourke said. His voice was flat, all business, no greeting. "Good evening, officer," Vance said, his voice calm and neutral. He slowly moved his right hand to the center console, retrieved his wallet, and pulled out his driver's license. Then he leaned over, opened the glove compartment, moving with an almost exaggerated care, and pulled out the registration folder. He handed both out the window. Rourke took them without a word. He shined his flashlight on the documents. The license checked out. The registration was valid. Then, as a matter of procedure, he looked from the license photo to the man in the car. This was the moment where the script usually changed, where the officer might say, "Okay, Mr. Vance, your tail light is a little dim, just get it fixed," or "You drifted a bit over the line back there. Be more careful." But that's not what happened. Rourke's eyes lingered. The man in the car was composed. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't avoiding eye contact. To Vance, this was being a cooperative citizen. To Rourke, in his current mindset, it felt like a challenge. It felt like the man was being too calm, too unafraid. It didn't match the story Rourke had already started writing in his head. The fact that the paperwork was clean almost made it more suspicious in his view. "Step out of the car for me," Rourke said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Vance felt the first prickle of real surprise. This was unusual for a simple traffic stop with no violation evident. But he was a man who believed in following instructions during a police encounter. It was safer for everyone. "Okay," he said evenly. He turned off the engine, removed the key, and opened the door, stepping out onto the pavement. "Is there a problem, officer?" Vance asked, standing beside his open car door. "Just stand right there," Rourke said, not answering the question. He walked back to his patrol car, the documents in hand. Vance stood, waiting. He watched the officer slide into his front seat, presumably to run the information. The normal process. A minute passed. Then two. Vance remained still, his hands at his sides. He was beginning to feel not like a director, but like any other citizen caught in a confusing, slightly intimidating situation. The power dynamic was clear, and he was on the weaker side of it. It was a feeling he hadn't personally felt in a very long time. Finally, Rourke emerged from his cruiser again. He walked back, but his posture was even more rigid than before. He stopped a few feet from Vance. "I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back," Rourke said. The words hung in the cool evening air. They were so unexpected, so out of scale with what was happening, that Vance actually took a second to process them. "I'm sorry?" Vance said, genuine confusion in his voice. "Officer, what is this about?" "I provided my documents." "I haven't done anything." "You're being detained." "Now turn around," Rourke repeated, his voice growing tighter. The "or else" was silent but loud in his tone. This was the critical juncture. Vance knew better than to physically resist. That was a one-way ticket to disaster. But he also knew his rights, and he knew procedure better than perhaps anyone in the state. "Officer," Vance said, keeping his voice low and firm, trying to break through the script he could see the other man was following. "My name is Samuel Vance. I am the director of the State Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board. My identification is in my wallet, which you have. This is a mistake." For a fraction of a second, he saw something flicker in Rourke's eyes. Was it doubt? Consideration? No, it was something harder. It was dismissal. To Rourke, this claim sounded like a lie, a desperate bluff from someone who was about to be caught. The idea that the head of all police training would be driving this car, in this area, at this time, didn't fit into his world. It was too improbable. The man was just saying it to get out of trouble. The flicker died. "I'm not going to ask you again," Rourke said, stepping closer. "Turn around, now." A cold wave of surreal understanding washed over Samuel Vance. He was being arrested or detained for no reason he could comprehend. And his official position, the truth of who he was being rejected as a fantasy. The irony was so thick he could taste it. He thought of the training modules, the role-playing scenarios about bias and escalation he had approved just last month. He was now living one, slowly, with a heart that had begun to pound a dull, angry rhythm against his ribs. Samuel Vance turned and placed his hands behind his back. The cold, hard metal of the handcuffs closed around his wrists with a decisive click. The sound was incredibly loud in the quiet street. The cuffs were tighter than they needed to be. Officer Rourke guided him, not roughly but firmly, to the front of the patrol car. "Put your hands on the hood." Vance complied, the smooth, warm metal of the car hood under his palms, a stark contrast to the steel on his wrists. He stared down at the reflections of the swirling blue lights in the polished paint. He was the director of law enforcement for the state, and he was standing handcuffed on the side of the road, detained by one of his own. All over a lane change that never happened. The story was just beginning, and for Officer Rourke, the ending he imagined was about to collide violently with the one that was actually coming. The hood of the patrol car was warm from the engine. Samuel Vance leaned against it, the position awkward with his hands cuffed behind his back. The metal of the cuffs was already pressing into his skin. He shifted his weight, trying to find a way to stand that didn't pull at his shoulders. He focused on the feeling of the sun's last heat on the back of his neck. It was a small, real thing to hold on to. Inside him, two people were fighting. One was the citizen, the man who felt a hot spike of humiliation and a cold trickle of fear. That man wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to let his anger roar out. The other man was the director. That man was already analyzing, observing, filing details away. The two tight cuffs. The officer's tone. The complete lack of a stated reason for this detention. It was a textbook case of escalation, happening right to him. Officer Rourke walked back to his patrol car's open door. He didn't look at Vance. He slid into the seat, the radio crackling with low, coded chatter from other units. The computer screen mounted between the seats glowed in the dim interior. He had Vance's driver's license in his hand. He punched the information into the system with a stiff finger, his jaw set. This was the part where the story was supposed to fall apart for the guy in cuffs. This was where Rourke would find the warrants, the suspended license, the history that justified his gut feeling. The computer whirred, processing. Rourke watched the screen, waiting for the confirmation of his own judgment. The first thing that came back was the driver's status, valid, clear. Rourke's eyebrows furrowed slightly. That was unusual, but not impossible. A clean driver could still be up to no good. He ran a wider search. He typed in the name, Samuel Vance. The system seemed to hesitate for a second. Then the screen refreshed. Instead of the usual sparse list of data, a different kind of message appeared. It wasn't red text for warnings. It was a plain, official banner at the top of the screen. Identity, verified, administrative flag, Tier 1. Beneath it, linked, were two lines, asterisk asterisk affiliation, state law enforcement training and standards, board, asterisk 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 title, director, asterisk asterisk a cold. Hollow feelings started in Officer Rourke's stomach. It was like the floor had dropped out from under his seat. He stared. He read the lines again. Then a third time. The words didn't change. His mind scrambled. It had to be a mistake. A system error. Someone with the same name. This couldn't be the man standing handcuffed outside his window. Directors didn't drive normal cars. They didn't get pulled over. They certainly didn't get detained without a parade of lawyers and assistants. He turned his head and looked out the windshield. The man was still there, hands on the hood, his posture now one of resigned patience. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't yelling. He was just waiting. A bolt of pure, undiluted panic shot through Rourke. His mouth went dry. He quickly hit a button on the system, requesting a secondary, deeper verification. The response was almost instantaneous, and even more direct. A small, urgent alert box popped up in the corner of the screen. Connected to the dispatcher's system dot at the county communications center, a dispatcher was monitoring the traffic. She saw the alert linked to Officer Rourke's unit. She opened the details, and her eyes widened. She immediately keyed her mic, her professional calm replaced with a sharp urgency. Unit 47 status check. Confirm your location and the status of your stop. Rourke's hand, which had been resting on the steering wheel, jerked at the sound of her voice. He fumbled for his own mic. 47, I'm code 4. Just a traffic stop. I have one male subject detained. The dispatcher's voice came back, tighter now. Unit 47, be advised. Your subject is identified as Samuel Vance, Director of the State Law Enforcement Training Board. Confirm you have that identification. The words, spoken aloud over the official radio channel, made it real. The cold feeling in Rourke's stomach turned to a lead weight. Every officer on that channel, every supervisor monitoring the traffic, had just heard it. He was exposed. His voice was a dry croak. 47 copy. I have the identification. There was a pause that felt like an hour. Then the dispatcher's voice came back. All business now. Stand by, 47. All units, clear the channel for a priority communication. Silence. Then a new voice, older, heavier with authority, came on. It was the watch commander, a lieutenant who oversaw the shift. 47, this is Lieutenant Harris. Do not move. Do not take any further action. I am en route to your location. 8A3 minutes. Confirm. 47. Confirmed, Rourke whispered. He let the mic drop. He sat in his cruiser, the engine still running, the blue lights still spinning silently, throwing their eerie glow over the scene. He was trapped. He couldn't get out and uncuff the man now. That would be an admission. He couldn't stay in the car. He just sat paralyzed, watching the man he had handcuffed. Outside, Samuel Vance heard the muffled radio traffic. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew the rhythm, the pattern. He'd heard it for 25 years. The initial call, the status check, and the sudden clearing of the channel. That only happened for serious things. An officer in trouble, or a major mistake. The silence that followed was more telling than any shout. He allowed himself a small, bitter smile, hidden from the officer in the car. The system, his system, was grinding into motion. The notification protocols he himself had helped design were now working against the officer who had cuffed him. The irony was so perfect, it was painful. He saw headlights turn swiftly into the parking lot. Not just one set, two. A standard patrol SUV and an unmarked sedan. They pulled up fast, parking at angles behind Rourke's cruiser. The doors flew open. A patrol captain, the bars on his collar gleaming under the streetlight, got out of the SUV. His face was a mask of professional calm, but his eyes were wide, scanning the scene. From the sedan emerged a man in a polo shirt and tactical pants, a district chief. His expression was pure, undiluted horror. They both saw it at the same time. The director of the training board, in a dress shirt with his tie loose, hands cuffed behind his back, leaning on the hood of one of their patrol cars. The captain moved first, striding past Rourke's cruiser without even glancing at the officer frozen inside. He went straight to Vance. "Sir," he said, his voice strained. "Sir, I am so sorry. Let's get these off you right now." He turned and barked toward Rourke's car. "Rourke! Out here, now!" Officer Rourke seemed to break from his trance. He stumbled out of his cruiser. His face was pale, waxy under the lights. He walked over, his steps slow, like he was walking through deep water. He couldn't meet the eyes of his captain or the chief. He focused on the cuffs on Vance's wrists, fumbling with the key ring on his belt. His hands were trembling so badly he could barely fit the small key into the lock. The click of the cuffs unlocking was the loudest sound any of them had ever heard. Vance brought his arms around front, wincing as the blood flowed back. He rubbed his wrists, feeling the deep grooves the metal had left. He didn't speak. He just looked from the terrified officer to the furious captain, to the mortified chief. The district chief finally found his voice. "Director Vance, I have no words. This is an unconscionable error. On behalf of the entire department, I apologize. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Vance finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. It wasn't the voice of an angry citizen. It was the calm, measured tone of a man who ran meetings for a living. "I'm fine. Just a bit cramped." The captain rounded on Rourke. "What is the violation? What was the probable cause for detention?" Rourke opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at the ground. He was. The lane change. The sentence died. Did you issue a citation?" The captain pressed, his voice like ice. "No, sir." "Did you articulate a reason for the detention to the director?" Rourke's silence was the answer. The district chief closed his eyes for a second, as if in physical pain. He then looked at Rourke. "Go sit in your car. Do not touch the radio. Do not say a word. Wait for me." It was an order that held the finality of a judge's gavel. Officer Rourke turned and walked back to his patrol car. He got in and closed the door. He sat there, in the driver's seat he had occupied with such confidence 20 minutes before, and watched through the windshield as his career ended in the parking lot. He saw the captain fetching a bottle of water from his SUV and handing it to Vance. He saw the district chief talking, his hands moving in gestures of profound apology. He saw Vance accept the water, take a sip, and then begin to speak, gesturing back toward the cruiser, where Rourke sat down inside the car. The world had gone quiet. The spinning lights seemed stupid now, a pointless show. The radio was silent. All he could hear was the hammering of his own heart and the deafening echo of that single, simple click of the handcuffs unlocking. Inside the patrol car, it was like a glass box. Officer Rourke could see everything happening, but he couldn't hear a word. The sounds from outside were muffled, as if he were underwater. He watched the scene play out like a bad movie on the other side of the windshield. His captain and the district chief were standing with the man he had just handcuffed. The man, Director Vance, was rubbing his wrists. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't pointing fingers. He was just talking, calm and low. He would say something, then gesture with an open hand toward Rourke's cruiser. Every time he did that, the captain and the chief would glance over, their faces hardening. Rourke's own face felt hot and cold at the same time. His palms were slick with sweat against the steering wheel he hadn't touched in minutes. His mind was a frantic scramble of thoughts, each one worse than the last. Asterisk, why didn't I listen? Why did I assume? System error. It had to be a system error. But they believed him. They're treating him like he's the governor. Asterisk, the excuses crumbled as fast as he could build them. He looked at his own hands, the same hands that had snapped the cuffs on the most powerful law enforcement official in the state's training system. He felt sick, outside. The conversation was very different from what he imagined. The district chief was speaking, his voice thick with a mix of anger and professional shame. Director Vance, I cannot begin to. This is the most severe failure of judgment I have witnessed in my career. You have my personal guarantee of a full, transparent investigation. He will be placed on administrative leave immediately, pending termination. Director Vance took a slow sip from the water bottle. The cold water felt good. It grounded him. He looked past the two anxious supervisors, his eyes resting on the man sitting in the patrol car. He didn't see a monster. He saw a problem. A symptom. "Before you talk about termination," Vance said, his voice even, "tell me about him." The captain and chief exchanged a quick glance. They had expected fury, demands, threats of lawsuits. They were braced for a storm. This quiet question threw them. "Officer Rourke?" The captain said, 11 years on. Solid arrest numbers. But he has a history." "What kind of history?" Vance asked. He already knew the answer, but he wanted to hear them say it. "Complaints," the chief admitted, looking at the ground. "Several. Mostly about attitude. Demeanor. A couple for excessive force that didn't stick. Internal Affairs looked at him a few times. Never enough to. You know, he's one of those guys who thinks the rules are for other people. Thinks he has a sixth sense for trouble." Vance nodded slowly. He'd met 100 officers like that. He'd probably been a bit like that himself, decades ago, as a young cop on tough streets. The difference was, the system back then either broke you or promoted you. Now, the system was supposed to catch you, retrain you, correct you. This was proof it hadn't. "So, you had an officer with a known pattern of complaints," Vance said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. A pattern suggesting bias and poor judgment. And the system cleared him every time. And because the system cleared him, he believed he was right. He believed his gut was more reliable than the rules. And tonight, his gut told him to handcuff me. The two supervisors stood silent. There was nothing to say. He had just summed up their entire failure in 3 sentences. "My concern isn't about me," Vance continued, looking back at them. "I'll be fine. My wrists will be sore tomorrow, and my pride is dented. My concern is about the person he stopped last week, or the person he would have stopped tomorrow if this hadn't happened. The person who doesn't have a title, who doesn't have you two showing up in 3 minutes. What happened to them? What did they endure because this officer's gut was wrong?" In the car, Rourke saw the director look his way again. This time, it felt different. It wasn't a glance of anger. It was a look of study, like he was a bug under a microscope. It made him feel smaller than any shouting could have. A new set of headlights approached, slower this time. A sergeant, summoned by the lieutenant, arrived. He got out, took in the scene with wide eyes, and was immediately pulled aside by the captain for hushed instructions. Vance watched this. The machinery of damage control was whirring to life. The sergeant began taking photographs of the scene, the positioning of the cars, the empty handcuffs now lying on the captain's front seat. He would be gathering evidence, not for a crime, but for a personnel file. "I need my personal items back," Vance said. "My license, my registration, my wallet." "Of course, sir," the captain said, moving quickly. He went to Rourke's cruiser, opened the passenger door, and retrieved the items from where they'd been left on the computer keyboard. He handed them back to Vance with a sort of reverence, as if returning stolen crown jewels. Vance slipped his wallet into his back pocket. The ordinary action felt strange. It was the first normal thing he'd done since getting out of his car. He looked at his own sedan, still sitting where he'd parked it. It looked so innocent. He called for a tow. Vance mentioned quietly. The district chief closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. "He what?" "Before he detained me. He said something into his radio about a tow. I believe he was having my vehicle impounded." For the first time, the chief's professional calm cracked. "Unbelievable," he muttered, a flash of pure rage in his eyes. He turned and barked at the sergeant. "Get on the line with dispatch and cancel any tow request for this vehicle immediately." Tell them it was a catastrophic error. The sergeant jumped to his cruiser's radio. Vance almost felt sorry for the two supervisors. Their night was ruined. Their careers might carry a stain from this, and they were powerless. All because of one man's uncheckable, wrong first instinct. He walked slowly back to his own car, the captain shadowing him nervously, as if he might trip and fall. Vance opened the driver's door. The interior light came on, familiar and welcoming. He just stood there, one hand on the roof, looking in. He needed a moment to stop being the director and just be a man who'd had a very bad, very strange evening. Behind him, he heard the district chief's footsteps approach. The man's voice was quieter now, stripped of its official power. "Director Vance, what would you like us to do? Right now. You tell me." Vance turned around. He looked at the chief, then at the captain, then finally, his gaze landed once more on Officer Rourke, still sitting in his glass box, waiting for his fate. "What happens next," Vance said, "isn't about what I want. It's about procedure. Your procedure. My procedure." The one he ignored. He took a deep breath. "But I will tell you this. When you speak to him, I don't want to hear that this was about failing to recognize my authority. That misses the point entirely. This was about a failure to see a human being. He didn't see me. He saw an idea in his head. That's the investigation you need to have. Not into how he treated a director, but into how he treats people." He got into his car. The seat felt familiar. He put the key in the ignition, but didn't turn it. He just sat, watching the strange tableau in his rearview mirror, the flashing lights, the cluster of police supervisors, and the lone officer in his cruiser isolated, waiting for the axe to fall. He knew the chief was about to walk over to that car. The final act was theirs. His part for tonight was over. All that was left was to drive home, to try and explain to his wife why he was late, and why he had the faint red marks of handcuffs around his wrists. He finally started the engine, the sound normal and loud in the quiet night. He pulled slowly away from the curb, leaving the swirling blue lights behind him, carrying the weight of a lesson he never wanted to learn firsthand. The director's sedan pulled away, its taillights shrinking into the dark and leaving the scene bathed in the unreal, swirling blue of the patrol cars. The normal sounds of the night-distant traffic, crickets, seemed to rush back in, making the whole event feel even more like a bizarre dream. But for the three officers left in the parking lot, it was a harsh, waking reality. The district chief watched Vance's car disappear. He let out a long, slow breath he felt like he'd been holding for an hour. The professional mask he'd worn for the director finally fell away, replaced by a deep, weary anger. He turned to the captain. "Get a unit over here to drive his cruiser back to the station. He's not touching it again." The captain nodded, already moving to the sergeant to give the order. Then the chief looked at the patrol car, at Officer Rourke, still sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. The chief's jaw tightened. The walk from where he stood to the driver's side window felt like the longest walk of his life. Each step was heavy with the weight of what he had to do. Inside the car, Rourke saw him coming. The chief's face, illuminated by the dashboard lights, looked grim and old. Rourke's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. This was it, the moment of judgment. He ran the words through his head one last time. I was just doing my job. The lane change was erratic. He was non-compliant. I felt threatened. The phrases, which had always worked before in reports and hearings, now felt as thin and useless as tissue paper. The chief didn't knock on the window. He simply stood there waiting. Rourke fumbled with the power window switch, lowering it halfway. The cool night air washed in, carrying the smell of exhaust and asphalt. For a few seconds, the chief just looked at him. It wasn't a look of rage. It was worse. It was a look of profound disappointment, of finality. "Step out of the vehicle, officer." Rourke's hand trembled as he opened the door. He stood up, his legs stiff. He avoided the chief's eyes, focusing instead on the man's shoulder, on the badge pinned to his polo shirt. "Walk with me," the chief said, his voice low and flat. He turned and walked a few paces away, toward the empty part of the shopping plaza lot, away from the other officers. Rourke followed, his boots scuffing on the pavement. They stopped under a bright white security light that hummed overhead. It felt like being on a stage. The chief turned to face him. "I'm not going to do a big speech, Rourke. I'm not going to ask you for your side. I saw enough. The director told me enough. The computer log shows enough." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You handcuffed the man who writes the rules for every officer in this state. You detained him without cause. You never issued a citation. You called for a tow on his legally parked vehicle. And when he identified himself, twice, you ignored it because it didn't fit the story you'd already written in your head." Rourke opened his mouth. "Sir, did you or did you not hear him say he was the director of the training board?" The chief interrupted, his voice like a blade. Rourke swallowed. I heard him say a title. Yes, but you thought he was lying," the chief finished for him. "You thought a 50-something-year-old man in a sedan was impersonating a police official during a traffic stop. That's the story you're going with?" The sheer stupidity of it, laid out so plainly, left Rourke silent. There was no defense. There was only the sinking feeling that he had not just made a mistake, but revealed a fundamental flaw in how he saw the world. The chief shook his head slowly. "For 11 years, Rourke, you've been a problem waiting to happen. The complaints, the attitude. We talked. Your supervisors talked. IA talked. You always walked away thinking you'd won, thinking it was all politics and paperwork. You never learned. You never changed." He took a step closer. "Tonight, you finally met a situation your attitude couldn't bully your way out of. And you failed, catastrophically." Rourke looked at the ground. The white light made every crack in the pavement look deep and shadowed. He thought of his mortgage, his kids' college fund, the way his father, a retired cop, would look at him when he heard. It all crumbled in his mind's eye. "Give me your badge and your service weapon," the chief said. There was no ceremony to it. It was a direct, clean order. The words, even though he knew they were coming, hit Rourke like a physical blow. He felt a hot sting behind his eyes, which he blinked away furiously. This was it. The end. With numb fingers, he reached to his belt, unsnapped the holster, and drew his pistol. He held it carefully, finger off the trigger, pointing it at the ground, and offered it grip first to the chief. The chief took it, cleared the chamber with a practiced motion, and slipped it into the back of his own waistband. Then came the badge. Rourke unpinned the shield from his uniform shirt. The metal was warm from his body heat. He looked at it for a second, the polished star, the numbers he'd memorized. This piece of metal had been his identity, his authority, his whole life for over a decade. He placed it in the chief's outstretched palm. The chief closed his hand over it without looking. "Your access to all department systems is revoked as of this moment," the chief said, his voice returning to that flat, procedural tone. "You will be escorted to the station. You will turn in your uniform, your gear, your keys. You are not to enter any police facility unless accompanied by internal affairs. You are officially suspended, and I am personally recommending your immediate termination to the city manager. The formal hearing will be a formality." Rourke just nodded. Words were impossible. "A sergeant will drive you home," the chief continued. You will not speak to the media. You will direct any questions to the department's public information officer. Do you understand these instructions?" "Yes, sir," Rourke managed to whisper. The chief looked at him for a long moment longer. The anger was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, something that looked almost like pity. "That man you cuffed," the chief said, his voice quieter. "He told me not to make this about him. He told me to make it about how you see people. That's what this is about, Rourke. You looked at a man, and you didn't see a person. You saw a stereotype. And that is the one thing we cannot have. Not ever." He turned and walked back toward the other officers, leaving Rourke standing alone under the buzzing, unforgiving light. The sergeant approached him, his expression carefully neutral. "Come on, Mark, let's go." It was the first use of his first name all night, and it sounded foreign. He was no longer officer. Rourke followed the sergeant to a different patrol car, not his own. He got into the passenger seat, the seat he had put so many others in over the years. He didn't look back as they drove away. He kept his eyes forward, watching the familiar streets of his town pass by, seeing them now through the eyes of a civilian, an outsider. The weight of the gun was gone from his hip. The weight of the badge was gone from his chest. All that was left was a heavier weight, settling deep in his gut, the shame of knowing that the director had been right. He hadn't seen a man. He'd seen an idea. And in 5 minutes, that idea had cost him everything. The morning sun felt different. It streamed through the kitchen window of Samuel Vance's home, bright and ordinary, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He sat at the table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. He was dressed for work again, a fresh suit, a crisp tie. But he was moving slowly. The marks on his wrists had faded to faint pink lines, but the memory was fresh. An ache that wasn't physical. His wife sat across from him. She had listened the night before, her face moving from confusion to shock to a quiet, protective anger as he told the story. She'd insisted on making him a big breakfast, which now sat mostly untouched. "You're sure you're okay to go in?" she asked for the 3rd time. "You could take the day. Let them stew." Vance offered a small smile. "That's exactly why I have to go in. If I hide, it becomes a scandal. If I walk in like it's Monday, it becomes a lesson." He kissed her goodbye, the ritual feeling both normal and deeply important. The drive to his office was the same route he took every day. But today, he noticed everything. The way other drivers changed lanes. The patrol car parked casually near a gas station. The whole world of traffic stops and police encounters, which had been his professional landscape for decades, now felt personal. Closer to the bone dot when he walked into the state office building, a hush seemed to follow him. The receptionist gave him a wide-eyed, sympathetic look. "Good morning, Director. Is everything?" "Morning, Linda," he said, his voice purposely normal. "Just need some more coffee." His assistant was waiting inside his office suite, looking like he'd been pacing. "Sir, the phone." "It's been—" The chief of police from the city called twice. The sheriff. The union president. The media line is ringing non-stop. "I've been following protocol. Just no comment at this time. But—" "It's fine," Vance said, hanging up his coat. "Hold all non-essential calls. Schedule a meeting with the city chief and the sheriff for this afternoon. And get me the complete personnel file for Officer Rourke. Everything from the city PD by 10 o'clock. The assistant nodded, scrambling to make notes. The normal routine of work was the best medicine. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburban house, the former officer was sitting at his own kitchen table. The silence was crushing. The house, usually empty at this hour, felt like a cage. He was still in the t-shirt and sweatpants he'd slept in. The uniform was in a heap by the washing machine where he'd thrown it last night. He couldn't bring himself to touch it, His phone buzzed relentlessly on the counter. Texts from buddies on the force. Asterisk. Hey man, heard what happened, you okay? Calls from numbers he didn't recognize, probably reporters. He ignored them all. The TV was off. The newspaper was still in the driveway. He couldn't face the world. He just stared at the wood grain of the table, replaying those 5 minutes on a loop. The click of the cuffs. The look on the director's face. The cold weight of his gun leaving his hand. Back in the director's office, the file arrived. Vance spent an hour reading it. The dry, official language of internal reports told a vivid story. Complaint after complaint. Officer was unnecessarily aggressive. Subject felt targeted due to race. Language was demeaning. Each one marked, investigated, unfounded, or inconclusive. Officer's account deemed credible. Vance leaned back in his chair. The system hadn't failed to spot the problem. It had spotted it again and again. It had just failed to fix it. The mechanisms for correction counseling, retraining, serious discipline had been too slow, too forgiving, too afraid of grievance procedures. They had treated a pattern of behavior as a series of isolated incidents, and a ticking time bomb had been allowed to keep walking the beat. His afternoon meeting was tense. The city police chief and the county sheriff were there, along with their top internal affairs commanders. They offered formal, embarrassed apologies. They assured him the termination process was moving at lightning speed. Vance listened. Then he pushed the personnel file across the table. "I'm not here for apologies about me," he said. "I'm here about this. This file is a map of our failure. Every one of you in this room looked at this map, and we all decided to hope the destination would change on its own. It didn't." He laid out a plan, not for punishment, but for prevention. A new statewide protocol for officers with multiple complaints of bias or aggression. No more just unfounded. If a pattern existed, it triggered mandatory. Immersive intervention, not just a day of sensitivity training, but a full reevaluation of fitness for duty with psychologists and veteran mentors. A second chance program, but with real teeth and real consequences for non-compliance. It can't be about nabbing the bad apples after they rot, Vance said, his voice firm. It has to be about pruning the tree while there's still time. This incident is the perfect catalyst. No one can argue the stakes now. The chiefs and sheriffs exchanged looks. It was a big ask. It would cost money. The union would fight it. But the man making the ask was sitting there with faint marks on his wrists, and they had no political ground to stand on. They agreed to form a committee. It was a start. A week later, the official termination hearing for Officer Rourke was a brief, somber affair. He did not contest it. His union representative gave a perfunctory argument, but the outcome was never in doubt. The official reason was conduct unbecoming an officer and gross insubordination. Everyone knew the real reason was a single, irreversible error in judgment. Vance did not attend. He had no desire to see the man again. His work was on the system, not the individual. A few months later, the director was visiting a police academy to observe the new, revised ethics training module, a module that now included a powerful, anonymized case study about an officer whose bias blinded him to reality, with catastrophic professional consequences. The recruits didn't know they were hearing the story of the man teaching them. Afterward, a young recruit approached him. She looked earnest, nervous. "Sir, that case study? How do we make sure that never happens to us? How do we know our own? Blind spots?" Vance looked at her, seeing the desire to get it right. He thought of the warm hood of the car, the surreal feeling of the cuffs. "You don't know," he said honestly. "That's the point. You have to assume you have them. So you cling to the rules. You listen. You verify. You let the facts lead you, not your gut. Your gut is a tool, but it's a dangerous one. The rules, the procedures, the respect for the person in front of you, that's your safety net. That night, an officer forgot that. He thought his gut was all he needed. And for 11 years, the system quietly agreed with him until it couldn't anymore. He drove home that night, taking the same route. He passed the same shopping plaza. There was no patrol car there. It was just a parking lot. The incident never made the major news. A small local article reported an officer had been terminated after a procedural violation during a stop. The real story, the important one, wasn't about a dramatic firing. It was quieter, slower. It was about memos, policy meetings, and training manuals being rewritten. It was about a system, painfully reminded of its own purpose, trying awkwardly to correct its course. And for Samuel Vance, the story was a reminder that the most abstract policies he worked on had a human cost, a human face. Sometimes it was his own face in the rearview mirror, watching the blue lights fade away, taking a lesson home that he was determined to teach.